Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Eliza Goldberg, and on behalf of everyone at Book Passage, I'd like to begin by saying thank you for coming out today and for supporting your local independent bookstore. This afternoon, I am delighted to introduce the supremely talented Bourne Morris. After many successful years working in advertising in New York City and Los Angeles, in 1983, Bourne joined the faculty of the Reynolds School of Journalism at the University of Nevada, Reno as a full professor, and in 2003, she was elected chair of the UNR Faculty Senate. In 2009, Bourne retired to write fiction, and today we are celebrating her debut novel, The Red Queen's Run. The first mystery in a trilogy that explores campus violence, The Red Queen's Run begins with the murder of the dean of the School of Journalism at Mountain West University. When Meredith Red Solaris is appointed interim dean, she teams up with the lead detective in hopes of solving the case before she becomes the killer's next victim. Bourne's experience behind the scenes at a university provides a unique, eye-opening depiction of the aggressive side of academia, while her vivid imagination creates a compulsively readable story filled with both heart-pounding suspense and heartwarming romance. Please join me in welcoming Bourne Morris.
Thank you, Eliza. Well, let me give you just a little background on how this all happened. I went to Bennington way back in the 1950s, and everybody who went to Bennington thought they should write something or paint something, and so when I came out of college, I went to New York to get a job, and I wanted to work for the New York Times or the New Yorker, and they didn't need me. So I ended up working in the advertising business. And I worked there for about 25 years, and then that sent me out from New York to Los Angeles, where my marriage ended. I moved to Nevada to marry my old college boyfriend. And that was a good move. That was a good move. And the university discovered me, and they hired me in as a full professor. And while I was at the university, I became aware of the tensions and the problems among members of the university faculty. And that gave me the idea for the book. And I thought, these people might kill each other if it weren't against the law. And I thought their quarrels were every bit as exciting, dramatic, unreasonable as the ones I'd seen in the advertising business or that I'd noticed in my clients. Do you need me to move anywhere, Eliza? Okay. So I'll read you a couple of passages from The Red Queen's Run, and then if you have questions, I will answer them. It opens with a story that really happened. Anyone who thinks a college campus is a haven of scholarship and civility hasn't been paying attention. Last year, I sat through a dozen faculty meetings with recurring visions of Dr. Amy Bishop flooding my mind. I could almost see Bishop seated in a 2010 faculty meeting at the University of Alabama, then see her stand, aim a 9mm gun at her friends and colleagues across the table, and begin firing. Before her gun jammed, Bishop killed 3 people, wounded 3 others, and then left the building and headed home to her husband and children. Madmen lurk among us. I don't recall the day when members of my own faculty began to scare me, or when their normal academic debates turned to prolonged and vicious quarreling. It was as if trouble crept up on us, a slow-moving storm that turned the sky pewter just before the funnel cloud manifested. I began to worry about potential violence. I do clearly remember the faculty meeting last August when George Weinstein's hand came down on the table so hard it bounced the piles of paper in front of us. "Larry Coleman doesn't deserve tenure," said George, breathing heavily. Sweat shone on his upper lip. "We should never have hired him in the first place. He's a lousy teacher and a third-rate scholar. I move we request his resignation." I could smell the fear in the room. Larry Coleman's eyes turned dark. His hands closed into fists. His lips tightened over his teeth. "George, shut the hell up," said Max Worthington from the other side of the table. His voice was low, almost soft, his face gray with anger. "You can't say that about a colleague. Not here, not now." "I can say whatever I goddamn please," said George, not even bothering to look at Max. Max's voice grew louder. "Tenure doesn't protect your right to slander." George moved around the end of the table until he was a foot away from Max. Max stood up. The two men loomed over us, big, tall, muscular. "Here we go." Partly hidden by my open laptop, I waited to find my voice, but I was paralyzed by the idea that anything I said would further inflame the situation. Pain in my stomach ruled me. It made me ashamed to think I was scared of two angry professors, but I was. I said nothing. Henry Brooks, our dean, sat morose and silent. Henry was the best boss I'd ever known. He didn't just manage, he inspired. Usually he helped us play to our strengths and overcome our weaknesses. His fine, handsome features rarely displayed despair. But that day he looked old and defeated. He was my hero, but I was sorry for him. "This school is in crisis," said Simon Gorshak, the oldest of the faculty. He twisted in his seat to face the dean. "Henry, what are you going to do about this?" "There's a motion on the floor," said George at the top of his voice. "But no second to the motion," said an obviously exhausted Henry. "And I don't think ad hominem remarks illuminate the conversation or our understanding." George turned and went back to his chair. Max sat down and pulled his laptop toward him. A message arrived on my screen from Max, fuming and banging on his keyboard. "Hold on tight, Red. Palace Revolution coming up." I typed a reply. "The revolution eats its children." After that meeting, Red gets a phone call, and the dean has been found dead at the bottom of the stairs in the School of Journalism. And she is appointed interim dean by the administration and has to deal with this very quarrelsome faculty, George and Max and Simon and all of them. And they fight each other, and she's very worried about how the school is going to turn out. And a police detective shows up and says, "We think that this may have been a homicide, not an accident that happened to the dean, and you could be the next target." So that sets her off on another path, which is to find out who was responsible for the dean's death. This is a section that happens a little later in the book. When she's been appointed dean, she's been through a very rough meeting. There have been a lot of criticisms, and she's trying to remember something from her childhood. So this is about the protagonist's childhood. "How do you get over that awful feeling you've just been promoted beyond your level of competence? Look at your resume," my father used to say. "Look at what you've already done, and look particularly at what you've already accomplished, especially if it was arduous. How did you get through grad school? How did you get to become associate dean?" What was bothering me? The faculty quarrel. The fights of children are terrible. I remember the red, sweaty face of an 8-year-old opponent in 8th grade. Behind him, I saw the cruelty in the face of his conspirators. They twisted my arm and stole my lunch money. That was one of the few fights I lost. For weeks afterward, I hated them all, and I wanted to make them bleed and cry and plead for mercy. Grown-ups presumably have their passions under control. In particular, sophisticated, well-educated grown-ups. But not my faculty. Somehow their feud had awakened hatred, and now a man was dead because of it. Perhaps hatred had always been there, a snake sleeping at the bottom of a basket. And then she has another memory. It was Ohio in midsummer. I was walking home from music camp. The air was heavy and moist, scented with cut grass. I was several blocks from home when I heard the distant squealing of brakes. The driver must have turned on the side street where I was walking because I saw a car go by in a blur, and I figured it was still going 50 when his fender struck a small blond boy and sent him headfirst into the iron fence. I saw the whole thing. I know I was shouting as I ran across the street because by the time I reached the car, people had come out of their houses and surrounded the boy. Even before a woman's voice started wailing, I knew from the way the kid's body was angled away from his neck that he was dead. As I approached the car, I could see the driver's face, white and sweaty. I don't know why, but I opened the car door and leaned in. "Get out," I said. "You're going to be sick and throw up all over your upholstery." And the guy got out. He had arms like a wrestler, black t-shirt with a Marlboro box folded into the sleeve. I guessed him to be in his 20s. He steadied himself and walked toward the crowd. I looked around. Everyone was focused on the boy's body, even the driver, who was standing well back of the others. The muscles in his back moved with his heavy breathing. I reached into the car and took his keys. I stuffed them in my pocket and then headed toward the edge of the crowd, trying to stay out of the driver's line of sight. You bastard, you killed my baby." I'll never forget the anguish in that mother's voice. I saw the driver stop, turn, and head back toward his car. An old man in the crowd came toward him and clawed at the driver's arm. "You can't leave," the old man hissed. The driver spun around and slammed his fist into the old man's face. Then he ran to his car and climbed in the front seat. I saw him bend down and search the floor. "Where the hell are my keys?" he said. "Who took my keys?" He got out of his car and looked around in panic. His eyes were wild. I couldn't stop staring at him. His eyes landed on me. I looked down, tried to focus on the root of an elm tree pushing its way through the concrete sidewalk. I knew I should run, but my legs wouldn't work. One quick stride over the chunk of broken sidewalk and I'd be clear to run. The crowd would stop the driver, wouldn't they? The old man had tried and gotten punched, and the crowd had done nothing. Sweat poured off my neck and down my back. "My keys, kid, my keys." The driver was maybe 3 feet away. I found my voice, if not my legs. "Mister, look around you. There are 20 people here." The driver cocked his head to one side, his hand shot out, palm toward me, threatening, "The keys, kid, or you'll get hurt." The crowd muttered. I sensed the crowd was shifting toward me, even some behind me. The old man was near and 2 younger men were behind the driver. "You lay a hand on me and you'll be sorry," I said in a voice that didn't sound like my own. "You've already killed one kid." The muttering became a growl. The driver's head swiveled. His arms came up with both fists clenched. The sudden whoop of the ambulance made him stagger. A police car moved silently into his view, red and blue light flashing across his face. His arms dropped to his side. His head fell forward as his legs buckled, forcing him to kneel on the hot pavement. As the first policeman reached the driver, I reached into my pocket and threw the keys into the street. "Good girl," I heard a man say. "Brave girl," said a woman nearby. A large woman with long white hair stood in front of me, blocking the sight of the driver and the policeman. A cigarette was planted firmly between her thick lips. Her face was framed in chins and greasy with the heat. She spoke softly to me. "Child, you are never going to be this afraid again." I ran all the way home to my father. When I told him about what had happened and what the white-haired woman had said to me, he said, "Red, my love, take that as prophecy." But the prophecy was wrong. Thank you very much. You like that?
Yeah, I do like it. Very good.
Well, I hope you enjoy reading the book. Do you have any questions, Bonnie?
I do.
Yeah.
I'm interested in your protagonist.
Yes.
I'm always interested in how a writer develops a protagonist. Where does it come from? Where was your inspiration for this protagonist?
Well, I wanted it to be a woman. a woman academic, young enough to have a love affair with a handsome cop, so that put her in her 30s. And also I thought readers would like her to be that age. But she's far enough along in her career to have been an associate dean who was then promoted to be the interim dean. So that was where I started. I wanted a woman who was accomplished, but also a woman who had some internal insecurities and was not perfect. I mean, was still a little scared of things. You find out as you read in the book that she had a difficult childhood. Her father was her friend, but her mother was an alcoholic, and it was very difficult for the family. Then I just kind of worked on her character, and much of it is revealed in her relationship with the cop that she joins up with, and a lot of it is revealed in her dialogue with faculty members who challenge her. And so that's how I developed her. And characters, I think, happen when the plot goes on. You know, as things happen, that's when you begin to see how someone reacts or how someone thinks about things, and then what makes them remember things.
Good, thank you.
Eliza.
What does your writing process look like?
Well, first of all, I'm not a morning person. I'm married to a morning person. That helps because he makes the coffee. So I get up, I drink some coffee, I read the New York Times online, and then around noon I change out of my bathrobe and into my clothes, and I sit down at the computer and I write for about 4 or 5 hours all through the afternoon, because the afternoon is my time. And my process is I know where a novel begins. I sort of know what's going to happen in the middle, but not for sure. And I know how it ends. I always, for some reason, I know what the last line of the book is going to be. Or should be. Sometimes my editors take exception and the last line changes. And sometimes the plot changes because the editors get a handle on it. But the process is I start writing the book at the beginning, and I let the book work its way. And sometimes surprising things happen. The characters, they don't really take over, but they become so real to me that other things occur, or they say things that I hadn't expected them to say. And if that's a process, I'm not sure it's a process, but that's what happens when I write. Well, thank you all. I'm sorry there aren't more of you, but there's lots of wine and cupcakes for those of you who are here.
Well, it was you also read it so beautifully.
Yes.
It really was.
I now wish I'd read the Audible edition. I don't know, we should probably.
Is it different? The Audible?
No, it's the same text.
Yeah.
But her reading of it is different.
Yeah, you wish it was your voice.
I wish I wish she read it the way I read it.
Yeah, because you read it.
For some reason, she
Perfectly.
felt compelled to drop her voice way down into a very low register to do the men's parts, and you don't really have to do that.
No.
You
No.
could just change it a little bit. You don't really have, but she did, and I'm not quite sure what to do about that.
One of our hosts actually, she just published a book and she's on tour right now, and it's a memoir, so she was having kind of a similar experience where she was feeling weird about it, especially because those were her stories and her words coming out of somebody else's mouth. So
I don't mind that it's a different voice than mine. I just wanted her to read it
The way she should have.
the way I thought she should have.
yeah.
But then, I've sometimes argued with editors too, who wanted me to change things. Although in the second book, which is now at the publisher, the second book in the trilogy, the editor had some suggestions which were right on, and so that was very helpful.
I have a question about your process with. So you finish a day of writing, and the next day, do you go back into what you wrote before and work on that?
I try. Somebody once said to me, never finish at the end of a chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Never stop writing. Start writing the next chapter, even if it's only a few lines.
Mm-hmm.
Because that way, when you pick it up the next day, you say, oh yeah, I know where I am and what's supposed to happen next, and you just keep going. And I've told my students, my university students, I said, try and write something all the way through. If it's a paper or an essay, write it from beginning to end. And don't go back and edit it, because when you start to edit while you're writing, you block. I think that's what gets people to never get off chapter 1. I mean, they keep rewriting chapter 1 so often they never get to chapter 2. And so, and the same is true for college students. When I was teaching them, they would say, I can't write this paper. I've got the first page done and I can't get any further. I said, go all the way to the end. Well, I haven't done all my research. Well, make it up and go back and fix it afterwards, and plug in stuff you want, and then edit again and again and again. So editing then becomes the process. I think I've probably edited this book 10 or 15 times. Other people have edited it, and now I'm doing the same with the second book. And that's with another editor, so now I'm starting to write the third book, which will, second book will be out this coming December, and the third book following year.
Do you read your books out loud as part of your editing
Yes.
process? Yeah.
Yes, because when I was in the advertising business, they taught us about auditing, and that we read with our ears. And that's why when we're reading something that's badly written, it doesn't sound right to us, because it's in our head and it doesn't sound right. Do they do that in your MFA program? Teach you about auditing? Yeah. And so reading out loud is important. Yeah.
It seems that there's a unique thing about mysteries where you've got a plot that has to hew this fine line between plausibility and mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And to what extent did you kind of know how that, just those plot points, how that was going to go, or was that part of the editing process of going back in later and making it make sense? If you see
For the first book, it kind of was quite linear. I really knew what happened, and then what happened, and then what happened. Mm-hmm. For the second book, when I sent it to I sent it out to friends, and one friend had a suggestion which changed the structure. And then the editor had a big suggestion. She said, the thing you put here belongs here. And doing that, bringing a scene from later on in the book to the front of the book changes the whole thing. So then I had to reweave the entire story. But it was a good suggestion. She was right.
Another question, you talked earlier about how you gave it to many friends or colleagues to read.
Yeah.
Did you give them any kind of a structure of a form to respond to, or did you just say
questions?
Have
did you understand this? I don't ask them to critique it, because that's not fair. They're friends. They're all going to say, "Oh, it's wonderful," when it isn't. And so I just say, did you understand this related to that? Did you have any questions? Were you able to separate the characters one from another? Because sometimes when I wrote the first book, the first couple of drafts, some of the characters had names that were too similar. That confused everybody, particularly when you're talking about a faculty of,
For sure.
8 or 9 people. So I had this, and then sometimes they just say, get rid of 4 of those people and concentrate on these guys.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
What made you decide it was going to be a trilogy?
I wanted to sell the book. And when I finished the first thought, I thought this could be a series. At least 3 stories,
Yeah.
3 possibilities occurred. So I just wrote paragraphs on the second book and a paragraph on the third book. I have not paid any attention to the descriptions I wrote in order to get a publisher to buy it. It just evolved later, but at least it showed to a publisher, this could be a series, and publishers want a series. That's what they want to publish. Because readers like that. Readers like to get to know a central character or a protagonist that they really like.
Especially if they like that character.
If they like her, if they like Red,
Mm-hmm.
then they will like the book, and they will want to read more about her. If they don't like her, it doesn't matter. And the Red Queens one is obviously a reference to Alice in Wonderland. And the,
That was my next
yeah, the Queen and Alice, Queen grabs Alice's hand and they, I think it's through the looking glass. They run and run and run, and finally Alice is exhausted. She just said she has to stop, so they stop. And Alice looks around, and they're exactly where they were when they began the race. And she says, she complains to the Queen. And the Queen says, oh, well, in this place, if you want to get anywhere, you have to run even faster. And I thought that's a perfect metaphor for academics who often feel they've been running and running and running and not getting anywhere. So, a lot of people feel that. So that was why.
I thought the memory, the second memory, that really gives you a feeling with this girl.
Yeah,
Really,
well, there are sections of her, of how tough she was as a
Yeah.
kid. And then she grows up and loses her courage and has to
Yeah.
find it again.
Yeah.
Has to deal with
She
it
knows
again.
it's there.
Well, thank you.
How did you get into mystery writing from your career?
I always wanted to write fiction. I mean, even when I was in college, I wanted to write fiction. I just, after I left Bennington and I couldn't get a job in any capacity, either as a reporter or as a creative writer, I thought, well, you can't just write a novel because you'll starve to death. And I was a scholarship kid. I didn't have a lot of money, so I went into the advertising business and wrote jingles for Campbell's soup.
Oh, really? You?
Pat
lived on
Barton,
Campbell's soup.
Bernstein and Osborne.
That was BBDO, and then McCann briefly, and then Ogilvy and Mather forever. It was a long, long time with them, and they're the ones who sent me out.
To California.
Hi.
I'm sorry, dear. I was not the city.
Tell me your name again.
Susan.
Susan, yes, that's right. Susan, this is my husband and my
Hi,
friend
Bob.
Kay and my
Met
niece
at
and
AAW.
Yes,
right.
that's right, we did. I'm sorry, well, you've probably read the book, so I just
I
finished.
haven't read the book yet. I'm ashamed to admit it. I will.
Oh, well, thank you very much for coming. I finished the reading. I won't
All right.
take you
No,
through
no,
it again.
No.
But, Susan, are you president of the Sisters in Crime? Yeah.
Oh, are you? Oh,
Yes.
wonderful.
Sisters in Crime.
You're welcome to join. If you
Yes.
What, do you have
I mean,
meetings?
interrupt you. Oh,
No,
because
that's
you're-
okay.
because You're the star. Come on now.
No, we're just talking now.
Do you have meetings here at the Book Passage or something?
We do sometimes. We have meetings. We have members from about 7 or 8 counties in the Bay Area. So we try to move around a little bit, and we have events and meetings, and we're set up for writers and for readers and librarians and
Oh, really?
fans.
So you can join if you're just a reader?
You certainly can.
Okay, how do I do that?
We can go to their website. I don't want to interrupt you. Barb, this is your
No,
thing.
that's
Come on
okay.
now.
That's okay.
I was sorry I was late. I was in the city.
I was just going to invite everybody to have some wine and chocolate cupcakes,
Have
which
you answered all the questions people have?
well, I've answered
I think
several.
more popping up as we go along.
Yeah.
I have a question about,
Okay.
so you created the character who is in her 30s.
Yeah.
So when you're creating her memories, you need to have her memories reflect her childhood, the memory you
Yeah.
have of her seeing the man hit
Yeah.
the boy in the car, and he gets out and he's got the cigarette box and he's
Yeah.
teaching all that. So you have to transpose your
Thank you.
your own thinking into this character, this age. What would a 30 or 35-year-old, let's say,
Yeah.
what would be real for her to have seen and observed, like the clothing of the man driving the car and that kind
Right.
of thing. How did you do that? To feel like you were able to, get that authenticity of age appropriate.
Well, I see the scene. I get into
see
the
it,
scene.
yeah.
It's like a little movie in my
Yeah.
head. And when I see him, obviously I have to describe the man as a certain kind of guy.
Yeah.
And when I was growing up, there was a certain guy who was sort of muscular and tough and wore T-shirts and tucked the cigarette box in the fold when people still smoked.
When is this set? Is it set
Well, it's set in the present time, but she was 35.
when that story happened?
No, when the story happened, she was 13. So it was a few years ago.
Because it was funny, because that struck me
Yes.
as an old, like, not something you'd see now, but you would have
Yes.
possibly, you know.
She would have seen it then. No, you wouldn't see it now.
Or you might see it now in
If you want.
Louisiana.
You might,
Alabama,
yeah.
different
Certain,
parts of the
certain,
country.
certain parts of the
There you
country.
go.
you might.
Yeah,
John.
it is really different when you go around the country.
Well,
It
but
changes.
this was Ohio in probably the 60s. It would, you know, maybe the 70s. How old would she? Well, she was 35 in the book. How old? I can't do the math. People ask me that. But anyway, a while ago, yeah.
But the point being, you see
Yeah.
it almost
Oh, thanks.
how would you say that? Cinematically?
I see it, and when I'm writing, I'm in the scene.
You're in it, yeah.
Is this true for you too, Susan? You get right into the scene.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Susan writes mysteries. So. And somebody just came in, and did I meet you before at another
Yeah, we
sister?
went to school together. Ann Chalfin.
Anne! Oh my God! Oh, I have to hug this woman. I haven't seen her for 60 years.
Oh,
You might have to demand a second reading.
Yeah. How nice. You're already late.
That's all right.
See, the one thing most of you don't know is I see a lot of her
Talking to the kids.
in these characters, especially in that character of Red.
You sort of have to. I mean, it's very
Yeah,
hard.
sure.
What?
Well, that's,
Well, I might, for Anne and for Susan, read another.
We'd love to hear more.
Okay, I will. Well, let's see.
Did you her, Larry? Yeah.
These are very good cupcakes, by
You
the
went to
way.
Bennington with her?
No, we went to
Kimberly?
boarding school together,
Boarding
Wow.
even
school.
before.
Really?
And I haven't seen her since. That's
Wow.
why I thought.
Really?
No,
How did you
I
find
told-
each other again?
we've been emailing, and I told Anne, who just got in from a trip, right? I told her about the book signing because she lives in this, and she said, "Oh, I'll try and make it. I don't know if I'll have the strength to get here."
Good for you.
Let me see. I have to find another section now because I hadn't planned on. That's too far in. I have to give me a moment, and then I will.
Take your time.
Don't read the end.
I'm not going to read the end.
Can I get anybody any more wine or cupcakes?
No, thank you. Do you need water back there?
I can grab you some water.
Okay, this is a meeting between Red, who is the protagonist, and the detective that she's getting to know. And it's after the dean's body has been found, and after she has been appointed interim dean of the journalism school. That's what the book is about. And she has a dog. She has a golden retriever. Best dogs in the world. The dog knew, just a quiet lick on my hand when I came through the door. Animals are so in touch. I fed the dog and poured myself a glass of wine. The television news was boring, and then a reporter came on with an interview with Elaine Morgan about Henry. Henry is the dean who died, and what he had done for the school. As a local editor, colleague, and friend of Henry, Elaine provided a respectful, even tender obituary. She looked good on television with the dark green eyes and the thick hair she shares with her brother. Her brother is a cop. I couldn't help but watch the clock, knowing Joe would arrive soon. At the end of the 5 o'clock news, the doorbell rang, and there stood Joe Morgan. This time the dog jumped up and down. A bias for alpha males, I reasoned. But I did have to admit Joe looked very attractive in a black cashmere turtleneck. "Is this a good time to talk?" he said. "Good as any," I said, leading him into the living room. "Wine?" "Thanks," he said. "Red if you have it." "I do. I take it you're not on duty." "I'm sort of on duty, but I'll take the wine." "Bad day?" "You might say so," he said. I brought him a glass and sat down opposite him. "How are you holding up?" He looked sympathetic. "I'm sad, but managing." Red, he looked down at his shoes. Much as I would like to know more about the faculty and more about your ethics course, right now I have to ask you where you were on Sunday. Where I was? Joe, do I need an alibi? Henry died of a heart attack, didn't he? Please just answer my question. Joe's green eyes were fixed on me. His was by far the best looking face of the day. Okay, detective, I went to a late afternoon movie with Sadie Hawkins. That got a smile. Sadie who? Seraphim Hawkins, former dean of liberal arts and a good friend. Everyone calls her Sadie. What time did you leave the movie? I'm not sure, but Sadie and I had some drinks here, and just as she left, the phone rang. It was Edwin Cartwell telling me about finding Henry's body. And Dr. Hawkins can vouch for you for the late afternoon and evening as well, Joe said. She can. Now tell me why she needs to. Because troubling stuff came up in the autopsy, said Joe, sipping his wine. There were injuries on Henry Burke's body that were inconsistent with a heart attack or a fall forward down a flight of stairs. Meaning more investigation into his death. To determine what? Joe looked very uncomfortable. Other contributing factors. That's bloody vague. Joe looked away from me, got up and went to the window. The dog followed him and he scratched behind the dog's ears. I have to ask you to stop by the station sometime tomorrow and give a statement, he said with his back still to me. Is that why you seem uncomfortable? I walked over to stand beside him. In part. What's the other part? He turned from the window toward me. The other part is I wanted to ask you out to dinner and this makes it awkward. I smiled up at him. I admired a good chiseled face with a firm jawline and not to mention those eyes. Dinner, yes indeed. So ask, I said, attempting to sound casual. Tomorrow night, he said, not quite a question. After I've given my statement. Yep. And after you've confirmed my alibi. He handed me his wine glass and moved to the front door. I held it open. For a moment he leaned toward me. I thought he might actually kiss me, but he raised his hand and very lightly touched my shoulder. I'll be here to pick you up tomorrow at 6:30, he said, and left. I spent the evening wondering whether or not Joe Morgan had wanted to kiss me, but backed off. Later in bed, I decided the gentle touch of his hand was even better than a kiss. A kiss is over and done with. Everyone kisses everyone. The touch of his fingertips was more intimate and more promising.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well,
That was great.
okay, more questions then.
Well, I have a question just about, you keep, in that particular chapter, or that segment, you kept turning a corner, with sort of setting us up to expect it to go one way, and then it turns, and it catches you off guard, and really it
What
elicits-
caught you off guard?
Well, when he asks her to, that he wants to ask her out on
Yeah.
a date, it's just so unexpected.
Yeah.
I mean, it may have been more set up in previous chapters, but it's this great turnaround.
Yeah.
It really grabs you, and it made me really laugh, hearing you read that. Just,
Well, good.
and I like that it's really intriguing. It really pulls me into, clearly he likes her, she likes him, but there's this whole other thing going on. A murder,
Yeah, I mean, they've got a
investigation,
murder to deal with.
the
Yeah.
political,
Yeah.
the politics that we've heard of before with the school.
Yeah.
But there's just this basic kind of attraction happening that cuts through all of that. And, okay, let's get you cleared up so we can go off and have this day.
Well, there was a
Very
big
funny.
question. One of my readers in particular questioned the romance happening at all when they're sharing it,
Right.
when they're investigating murder, and she's helping him investigate the faculty so that he can figure out who killed the dean. And they said, well, a cop would never date somebody he was working with. And I said, and he knows that. And there's a lot of tension between them through the first part of the book, because obviously they want to go out with each other and more, but they're worried about the inappropriateness or the conflict of interest or something. And then finally he just says, well, I'm over it, we're going to go out. So they go out and they have dinner, and that begins their relationship. He's a good cop anyway. He reads poetry and likes opera.
He's an unusual
Yeah.
cop.
And there's a long tradition in crime fiction of
Yes.
policemen violating that
That
unstated rule.
rule
of going out with
and
them
go
when
falling
they're-
in love with the
Right.
woman anyway.
Happens all the time in fiction, we know it.
Yeah.
That's why they call it fiction.
That's
right.
right. How to play with things.
Yeah.
Also, there's another surprise in that chapter, just based on what I was anticipating, which I had no idea that there was a moment where she was a suspect, right? I mean, this,
Oh,
and
sure.
here she is, like, here she's a
Everybody.
suspect.
Well, that's why he comes to her house.
Exactly.
Because now that they've determined it's a homicide,
Yeah.
and she is one of the faculty, she
Clearly
has to
she
have
is
an
a
alibi.
suspect.
They have to check everybody's
Yeah.
alibi, so that's another reason he really,
Yeah.
has to-
Let's make sure you get off the suspect
she,
list.
her alibi sticks.
It's really good.
Can I invite you all to have some wine and chocolate? Red drinks red wine all through the book. She likes Pinot Noir. And the chocolate is just for fun.
Yeah.
It's really good. I vouch for the cupcake.